So here we are, our first Sunday morning for the Hills Community Church ever. It's not what we expected. We thought we would be together here outside at Double Peak School. I'm actually coming to you from the Performing Arts Center, which they've told us when guidelines are raised, we will be able to meet here. But due to the pandemic, due to some people testing positive, a lot of people on our team testing positive, we're online today. But you know what? Praise God, because His purpose and His word can't be stopped by a pandemic. That's for sure. So let's get this started off right. With all the sickness that we've got going on in our world, we want to be healthy. We want to be healthy in all the ways, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And so we're starting a new series right now called New Year, New You. The pandemic has been an attack on health in every way. I mean, there's people getting COVID everywhere. There's 2 in my house that have COVID. We have a lot of leaders in our church who have had COVID this week, have been exposed to COVID. That's actually part of the reason we are coming to you online today is because of the pandemic. And some of you, have even lost loved ones. I'm so sorry for that. And honestly, it's not even just physical health that we're dealing with. So many people, maybe you are living in isolation. And if that's you, I'm so sorry. It's so hard. We were not meant to live in isolation. We were meant to live in community. And that's what we want. We want to be the Hills Community Church. And there's people who have been fighting depression, fear, anxiety, addiction, even suicide. I met with the superintendent of San Marcos schools a couple weeks ago, and he said in the first 3 months of this year's school year, he had more people, more students referred to professional counselors than he ever has in an entire school year. So I think that's just one symptom, like we are not well. We need to get healthy. So what do we do? How do we get healthy, right? Do we just sit around and feel broken and messy and just wallow? No. To get healthy, we go to the source of health. We go to Jesus. Jesus is the only one who can truly make us well. Jesus is the only one who can truly make us well. My friend Morgan was in a clinical study last month in a hospital, and they were testing a drug for narcolepsy. But not all the people who were in the trial got this pill. Some of them just got a placebo. A placebo is a pill that doesn't do anything. When you take a placebo, what happens? Nothing happens because it's not a real pill. It's not a real medicine. And so it has zero nutritional and medical value. You can't OD on a placebo. Why am I telling you about a placebo? Here's why. Because everything the world has to offer is a placebo compared to Jesus. Jesus is the real thing. Jesus is the one who can make us well. He's the only one who can make us well. And true health comes from Him. Maybe you have even experienced some of this placebo stuff I'm talking about. Like if you found like the key to like, maybe it's meditation, or you've gotten the right diet, or you found the right mixture of essential oils, or exercise. Man, today we're all exercising in the beginning of the year. And if you even get really good at that stuff and you find a level of physical health, mental health, spiritual health, whatever, it never truly makes you well without Jesus. Because even though those things are good, they were never meant to be the answer to your truest sense of well-being. And so you may be hearing me and kind of disagreeing, like, no, I think I found the key to my health and I've got it figured out. And if that's you, great. This message is actually not for you. And Jesus may not be for you. Jesus told His followers in Mark 2:17, He said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And if we're going to get healthy in all the ways, we have to be real about what makes us sick. And it's sin. You and I have this problem. We have rebelled in our hearts against God from our true source of life and health. And the cool thing is that Jesus is the antidote to sin. Jesus is not a placebo. Jesus is the real thing. He makes us new. He gives us life, health, purpose, vision for the future. And we want to look at what He has to say about all the different ways to get healthy. And as we read this passage in Mark, it's Mark chapter 12, verses 28 through 34. As we read this passage, I want you to be thinking in your mind about all the different levels that Jesus says to love the Lord. So this is Mark 12, Jesus has just answered some really hard questions. They told him, Jesus, should we pay taxes to Caesar? And Jesus said, well, whose face is on the coin? They said, Caesar's. And he said, give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God's, which God's is your life. And then they asked him about this woman who married a man. He died. She married his brother. And they were like, whose wife will she be in the resurrection? And Jesus said, they're not married or given in marriage in the resurrection. In fact, they'll all be like the angels. And so they're really impressed with Jesus. And this is Mark 12, verse 28. One of the leaders of the law came up to him, and hearing them debating, noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? Right away, Jesus says, the most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. Well, teacher, the man replied, you are right in saying that God is one and there's no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, with all your strength. To love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices. And when Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far off from the kingdom of God. From then on, no one dared ask him any questions. So we're going to dive into the answer that Jesus gave for a few weeks. So go back to just what he said really quickly. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So this answer from Jesus is actually not a typical answer. Usually Jesus will answer a question with a question. So the guy who asked it, as soon as Jesus answered it, he instantly agrees. He knew that love was more important than sacrifices. But this guy doesn't fully get it. Jesus tells him, you're not far off from the kingdom. Not far off, because he understands it intellectually. In his mind, he knows. But he doesn't fully live it out in his heart. And heart is the first thing that Jesus addresses. And so it's going to be the first thing that we address. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart. That word heart, it doesn't just mean the organ in your chest. It's beating blood. It means all that is within you. It's your well of emotions, affections, your will. And whatever your affections are leaning towards, that's what you pursue. When I stand, I try to stand where I'm not leaning, right? But if I start leaning, which way am I going to fall? I'm probably going to fall the direction I'm leaning. And it's the same for your affections. Wherever your affections are leaning, that's what you're going towards. And you may even know this can be dangerous. But you can either ignore it, or you can try to acknowledge that your heart is leaning towards something and try to learn from it. And here's what Jesus says. Jesus says the healthiest heart is the heart that loves God. It doesn't just say have a healthy heart. He says love the Lord your God with all your heart. And if I'm really honest, this is hard for me. Because I'm supposed to love God with all my heart, yet I cannot control my own emotions. Maybe you figured this out. Maybe you're better than me. But I can't control my emotions, and I'm supposed to love God with all my heart. And let me just sit here for a second and say this. The inability to control your emotions next to the command to love the Lord with all your heart exposes your depravity. Depravity is just a big word that means there's an endless chasm between God's holiness and my sinfulness. That big gap is called depravity. And whenever you think about how I can't control my emotions, even though God tells me to love him with all my heart, you see that gap. You see that depravity. It's put on display. And really, we all respond to that problem in different ways. Some of us wear our hearts on our sleeves. No one ever has to ask you how you're feeling because they can tell just by seeing you. Some of us try to bury our emotions. I can fall into that camp pretty regularly. But the problem is you can't really bury your emotions. Eventually they come out sideways, don't they? They're going to mess with somebody somehow, maybe even the people closest to you. So it seems like a difficult, maybe even impossible thing to love God with all your heart. And I would say you're right if you think that, because it was never meant to start with you. It was never meant to start with you. Love was not something that you're supposed to just muster for God. Love is a response. After Jesus said this command, he went on and he showed the greatest example of love in human history, dying on the cross to cover your sin, to fill that huge chasm of our depravity. He gave his life for our health. It says in Romans 5:8, God demonstrated his love in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so I can't love God on my own, and neither can you. When I think about all he's done for me, I think about like he put breath in my lungs. He created every part of me on purpose. He gave me life. He placed people around me that I love, that love me, that care for me. He died for me. He paid the price for me to know God and have a relationship with him. He gave me this incredible like home in heaven and a calling here on earth to walk in, to be part of building his kingdom. I think about all those things that he's done for me, who he's been to me, how much he loves me, and I can't help but love him back. Only those who have received love from God can give it back to him. You know, I've never heard my kids cuss yet. I've got 4 kids, 10, 8, 6, and 4, and actually 10, 8, 7, and 4. And one day I know I'm going to hear them say a cuss word. And you know what I'm going to say? As soon as I hear that cuss word, I'm going to say, where did you hear that? Because you don't just come up with cuss words, right? You have to figure, like language is something that's taught to you. And it's the same with love. Love is something that you have to be taught. Love is something that you receive before you can give. And so when you feel unable to love God, don't just try to muster it. Go back. Remember all that he's done for you. Remind yourself the gospel. The gospel says, I deserve to be punished. I deserve death. I deserve to be separated from God. But the gospel says Jesus took that punishment on the cross. He died for me. And I get to live freely, and I get to have a relationship with him. That's the gospel, Jesus in my place. And may the gospel be the core of our emotional health. And once we get that response of love in your heart, then you can start taking steps to get healthy emotionally. So, does anyone have a car? I would imagine you probably have a car. Maybe you don't have a car. Someone around you has a car. Does your car break down all the time? Hopefully not. Hopefully you are smart enough to know that there's steps you can take. They're called preventative maintenance. So like changing your oil, rotating your tires, putting gas in the car, changing out filters when they need to be changed. That's all preventative maintenance. And you do the preventative maintenance so that you don't break down in the middle of the road. And it's the same for your heart. You can take measures right now to start making your heart healthy. And there's 3 things that I want to challenge you to do starting this week. And they're really simple. The first one, figure out how you're feeling. 2, take your feelings to God. 3, find a good friend who will help. So the first thing, figure out your feelings. I'll be really honest and say, this is not easy for me. My wife, Amy, will ask me how I'm feeling, and I'll say, I don't know. Maybe it is easy for you, so check, you got this. But for me, I've got to look at my kids' feelings chart that has the little faces that say how they feel. Or sometimes I'll even Google feeling words. That's an easy way to do it. But this, figure out what you're feeling, this requires honesty. And if you can't figure it out, you might need to process with someone else. Let me just give you a quick tip. If you're trying to figure out your feelings and you end up saying something like, I feel like you, stop right there, because that's not a feeling. I feel like you is actually telling them what they're doing. You need to say, I feel like I, and then you feel your feelings. So you might need to process with someone. You might need to process with a counselor. I've had some really hard life things that have happened in my life, and I have loved getting counseling. And if you've been around for a while, you know I talk about counseling all the time. You may be thinking, Brian, are you trying to say that everyone needs a counselor? Maybe. It's really healthy. It's really, really healthy to process with someone, even a professional that's good at listening. But here's the thing. There are tiny earthquakes all the time down in La Jolla on the coast. And that sounds kind of crazy, right? But it's actually really healthy, because if they let that pressure just sit and build, then there would be a huge rupture, and there would be billions of dollars worth of homes like just in the Pacific Ocean. You've got to let it come out naturally. So number one, figure out your feelings. Number two, take your feelings to God. Stop editing your prayers. I figured this out a while ago. Like, I was really honest with myself, and I said, you know what? I have only been telling God things that I think he wants me to say. And instead, I started saying, okay, he knows what's in my heart already, so I'm just going to share. I'm going to share my frustration. I'm going to share how I'm feeling with God. But you got to know what you're feeling first. And so figure out your feelings and then share them with God. This is how you grow in your relationship with him. You learn to trust him because he does care for you, and he wants to hear you tell him what's on your heart. And when you do that, it's almost like an opportunity for him to remind you how much he loves you, for you to remind yourself how much he loves you. Remind yourself the gospel. Unload on God. You know, there's someone in your life that if you unload on them, it's going to destroy them. But God is strong enough. You can unload on him. He can bear it so much better than anyone else. That's why that's step 2. And then step 3 is find a good friend who will help. This is someone who will process with you, someone who will pray for you, someone who will remind you of what's true, not someone who's going to fuel your frustration. You know, you have that person that you go to, and when you're mad, they like get mad with you, and you get more mad, and you leave, and you don't feel any better. You feel worse. Don't go to that person. Go to a person who's going to listen to you. Go to a person that's going to ask good questions. That's what Jesus was great at. He asked good questions. So don't unload on someone who doesn't want it or someone who isn't ready for it. And this can't be everyone. That's why I said find someone that's a good friend that will help. Just find one person. You still need to have a filter with most people. It's not helpful to overshare to everyone you're around. So find one. Figure out your feelings. Take your feelings to God. And find a good friend. This is going to be risky, opening up. But the truth is, our world is in need of people who have heart, who will have courage. I read a news article this week, and it was kind of scary to think about. It said our country is already more divided than we were before the Civil War. But most people just don't have the guts to fight. And I'm not trying to say I think we need to go to war. I believe we need peace. And the way we need to get to peace is for men and women of courage to stand up and be brave and be full of heart. Brene Brown is an author that studies courage and bravery with special forces and military all over the world. And she says there is no courage without vulnerability. And let that sink in for a second. There is no courage without vulnerability. Vulnerability is defined as like an uncertainty and risk that comes with emotional exposure. In Cars 3, I love this story. Lightning McQueen is a veteran racer, and he's got this trainer, Cruz Ramirez. And Cruz, towards the end of the movie, always had a dream to be a race car, but she kind of never even sounded like a race car. And she was fast, but at the end of the movie, Lightning brings her in, and she finishes the race for him. And the team takes off her muffler. And before, she didn't sound like a race car, but when they took off the muffler, there's no doubt that she is a race car. All of her life, she was looking forward to it, and they took off the muffler, and you could hear it. What if we took off the muffler of our emotions? It's scary, it's vulnerable, but it's so worth it. I'm from Texas, and one thing we say, like, when we're going to just let something go and, like, open it up is let her rip. That's kind of what Cruz Ramirez did when they took the muffler off and she went racing. Let her rip, right? To see the courage, to see the bravery. I want to see the heart that we were meant to live with. Let her rip. Stop muffling your emotions. Let's be a people who live with passion. Yeah, we're going to get hurt, but we're going to experience emotional health. This is going to not only affect you, it's going to affect your relationships. This is going to affect how we live out the mission of Jesus. It's going to change our world. And I really do believe it starts with getting emotionally healthy, loving God with all your heart. This is only the first step towards the new year, new you. Next week is going to be an incredible message about spiritual health from our discipleship director, Mike Ulig. So come with us. We're going to go over all the ways we want to get healthy this year. Heart, soul, mind, strength. New year, new you. But we're starting it off right today. Get your heart right. Love God with your heart. Let it be a response. Let her rip.